All right, I'm gonna press record.
Cool.
Awesome.
I'm a pro member, so this is okay. Stop. No, I don't wanna. I guess it is recording. Huh.
Yeah, I
Nice.
see it up there.
Yeah, it says we got it. We
Yay.
got it.
And we can also we can go live too, which I love. So I was like, let's do it.
Absolutely.
Let's just do it.
This big. Let's do it. There.
All right.
Just make use of this Zoom Pro account.
You got to get your money's worth here.
What model TV is that?
I don't know. It's one of these virtual filters. You know, I'm like,
it's so cool.
love this stuff.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, people know what we're doing, but I will call it Artists Talk, and they'll hopefully know. Oh, it says gaming. Oh, yes.
I love it. I love it. They don't know.
Right? It looks like, this looks like Twitch. This is a really cool game.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you ever went and created a game, I imagine it would be fantastic.
Well, maybe that's on the horizon. Maybe that's something I need to look into, you know?
Yeah. Or
Dude makes
virtual
crazy
reality.
video games. I do not have a doubt.
Virtual reality. I mean, like people being able to strap on the headset and see things with depth. It would kind of convert your point about COVID into your art, where people who can't see it at the window can suddenly see it with dimension.
Right. And so when I joke about something, I'm probably like, oh, wow, that's probably totally going to happen for me. So that's how you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
that's how you manifest things.
I was going to say, you've got to manifest it. You just make it real. Speak it into being.
Exactly. Wow. So we have, this is exciting. So yeah, I just put on a virtual filter. And they have quite a few, and they're located on where it says your camera, like that little arrow thing. I mean, you can give yourself like a pizza hat, which is nice. And then virtual backgrounds, you can choose your own image. There's a plus sign to add your own images or video.
Oh, wow.
I know. It's actually kind of amazing.
It is.
So are all the images from the show, or are they just from your history of producing art?
Oh, just, yeah, my history.
Okay.
But I don't have I just put a few on there to be clever. And then I can switch around in my art. I can just be in my art. Television.
What's that one?
This is one of the paintings that's in the show.
Oh, wow.
It's in the room it's in this room. It's in the room with all the paintings on the wall.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
How big is it?
It's these are small pieces. These are all like 9 by 9 paint, 9 inches by 9.
Yeah, it looks so sculptural.
Yeah, it is, because hi, look at us. We're talking about the art. This is
we did it.
It's actually happening. So yeah, these are contorted hazelnut tree branches back there.
Wait 1 moment.
Wow. Yeah, look at how my hand in the branches are.
Yeah. Are you in front of a green screen right now, or is it just
No. The virtual backgrounds, it's better if you have a green screen.
Right.
My green screen is like tore up in pieces. It was part of the performances that I did. Well, you know, those, wow. What was that? But yeah. These are the ones from my performance the other night that I did in the basement. You can't really see all of them, because I mean, I'm there like playing drone synthesizer.
Yeah.
All these videos. So
Yeah, well, I saw that in the second work that we looked at, where the first you were in full costume with your two hands, or four
Yeah.
hands really, and the second you were using a synthesizer, and you were overlaying video. So how exactly did that work technically?
Well, I really got a lot of help working with Co-Prosperity that got a developed. They got a really cool grant from Andy Warhol Foundation to do an experimental television studio.
Hmm.
So they've got all these cameras and can do chroma key. It's a really cool setup. So I wonder if I have a picture of like what the setup looks like. It's not really giving me anyway, it's a base. I was in the basement for this one, and it just meant like if I wore green, then sometimes it was projected onto me, but that it didn't always translate as green. Sometimes I just ended up being kind of canceled out or looking kind of like a blob like that.
Well, I
Right.
love the parts where parts of your body would disappear and you would just see the image that was projected behind it. And I saw that the videos were from varying times. It seemed like there was one that you could hear, but then one in the background that seemed maybe from sometime in the past. And I wasn't sure of the time frames and like how you correlated those images.
Well, a lot of those videos were made like 13 years ago when I did like a video a day, which was challenging. And obviously, I set that up. Like, I was like, I want to be challenged. I
Right.
want to, like, I want to see what would happen if I have like only a day to prepare. And I also, want to kind of, um, YouTube was like this place to broadcast the self. And I thought, well, let me play around with like, I don't know. I mean, I'm broadcasting neurosis. That's a
Right.
whole
And
other.
you were like an early adopter too. I mean, that's like when YouTube was fresh, it's like when it still was like a place where you could discover anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, I missed the influencer boat, but I was also like, bye.
Right.
That was never really my intention. And there are a lot of really interesting artists that have played around with subverting, becoming someone different and then subverting a community.
Yeah.
And I've never been really like that interested in actually really pulling the wool over anyone's eyes. I'm actually way more interested in like, let me expose what's behind that. And so I'm so interested in that. So to answer your question about like how did we decide the videos, I like to work with the I Ching. So I like chants, and a lot of the longer videos that I have on my, after I did all those like 350 videos on YouTube for Pink Anxiety. That was my year-long residency. That's what I called it. Then I did longer works, but I didn't want to go into like video editing mastery. I was actually really interested in doing blind edits. So I did a lot of blind edits where you're just kind of like on an iMovie where you're just like, I'm just gonna put this here and this here and this
Okay.
here.
Sort of
Because that's
let the machine do its job, do the work for you in a little bit.
yeah, and that's what a painter does.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, well, let me see what's going to happen. Let me put something over here to see what that looks like. Oh, wait, I don't like that. Let me pull that away, or let me add something else to that. So thinking of video making as painting and not being fussy about, I don't know, video art.
Yeah, looking at it as layers almost rather than cuts or edits. Because I always find
Yeah.
that like art is, like a big thing of what actually art is like creating boundaries for yourself, or like
Mhm.
creating a system from which to work from.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And that's where
Totally.
like the real experimentation comes in when you've given yourself constraints that might be random. you know, because you said you love chance, and I love that pursuit too, where you know the artistry isn't agonizing over these details, you know.
Yeah, that's actually really important to me because the artists that agonize over the details, like you said, they miss the joy of creating. They
Mhm.
miss the like why all of us creatives are drawn to this path is that there are these sparks, that there's this invention that happens, that there's spontaneity, you know, that like something combusts in studio, like scientific experiments, something bubbles over, something spills, and that makes the painting or that makes the sculpture. And to get into this, for that to happen, you've got to be committed to your studio practice. That means it can't be such a job that you've drained all the excitement from it.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's also like really, that's why I call myself a biodynamic artist.
Mm.
And actually, you know, I didn't really understand that's what I was. It was more, I was just doing my thing. And then, you, like you said, like creating a structure or a constraint, but having fun with that. Like, obviously, a circus is in a ring for a reason, like the circle around all these events, and like the clown and the tightrope walker, and all of it's just like it's totally orchestrated to look like it's just chaos, but it's rehearsed. So there's a certain amount of like, well, even to, you know, you've got to rehearse to get that chaos, but you've also got to have chaos before you rehearse. I don't know if I answered that. What I meant is that you got to have a certain amount of chaos.
Yeah, I love
You
that.
gotta love it.
Because creation comes from the abyss, right? You almost like you need an abyss to produce that, to find that creation, I think, you know.
I think so too. I
Yeah.
think so. And if you, you know, and I would say, you know, if the abyss isn't outside, the abyss is within. And you know,
Mm.
the parts of my practice that are really self-reflexive, that where I really see the art making as essential as like, oh, making the bed and eating healthy and getting enough sleep. Like the art making is really intrinsic to like my daily life. And which means that I, you know, I really see its value. You know, I think of it as like, wow, you know, you want to be healthy, you've got to like enjoy your creative process. Then you can't be like, oh, I gotta paint those damn paintings.
Yeah.
You've got to be like, wow, I can't wait to see what happens when these two materials interact. And
Yeah,
yeah,
I saw a couple like repeating like phrases and concepts, um, like the inner child,
yeah,
mirror, but also like this sort of ineffable, untouchable thing that cannot be taught. Like in the part that was almost like a monologue, right?
hmm,
It had more of a like philosophical bent than some
hmm,
of the other parts.
yeah,
The core, or I would say explicitly, because you know it's impossible to surmise what exactly is your philosophical intention in every moment of the artwork, but it really touched upon sort of this thing that you cannot learn in an art school. This thing that comes from art that is embodied,
hmm,
that you know, something that a scientist would not like to admit, right?
hmm,
And
hmm.
and it seemed throughout that this was something that you were trying to express. Do you see that it's almost as like an impossibility to actually express it in art and create its own sort of arbitrary boundary that you're always trying to grasp at this thing that's
Yeah,
almost possible to say?
yeah. I, yeah, that resonates. There's a kind of, I'm very interested in like poetics at the same time as like, you know, it's just saying chaos theory. And then I'm like, yeah, I do think of myself as a total scientist. But those the poetry of my work, I think, is in all of these like connections that I'm always wanting to make with things. Not really like not the driving mechanism, because I feel like it's just, I think, like, guess what I'm trying to say is that, like, if it's a poem that I'm making, like, I'm not writing it. Because
Yeah,
that's maybe what I'm trying to say.
it's like the Dada approach, right? You know, it's like you can make poetry by cutting up the newspaper, mixing it up in a bag, and choosing it at random. You know, the poetry will create itself. You know, and it's like, I think what you mean about the relational aspect of that, it's like it's about embracing those relationships, even if it doesn't make sense at first. There's
Yeah.
still a relationship there that can be fostered and explored and enjoyed and you know, like that's the surprise of life. You know, we don't get to choose who we get to meet necessarily, you know. Yeah,
Right.
right.
The
Well,
surprise.
you said 13 years ago you were doing these videos per day, right? And you're
Yeah.
standing in front of a camera.
Yeah.
This contemporary work is highly layered in you suturing together various media. You know, there's synth, there's video, there's obviously this heavy presence of costuming, of
Mm.
performance, of character, right? Um, was this something that you felt present always, or is it just something that's elaborated over time?
I think that it also just kind of like answer to like this synesthetic way that I experience the world, and that I am actually synesthetic, um, which we all are. When we're
Mm.
about 2, we start to unlearn our synesthesia. So most creatives like tap into synesthesia, where you like, you know, you see things when you hear music, and yeah, like a roundabout way to to look at everything is really to be like, just being in the world, and what are the sensations through all the senses. There is like that, sure, the childlike wonder of being in the world, playing dress up for sure, and drag in my work. But, you know, like behind me, this is from a film I'm working on, Hereaclitus. Some of the personas aren't personas to, you know, to dress up and play with identity. They're this creature that's about dissolving in a landscape, to become other, to become something, not just the entertainer, not just the artist, and not just, you know, the poet or the dancer, but a spiritual experience of reality. There you go. There it is, the metaphysics. And that's something that really, you know, as I get older, it becomes even more the more important driving force in my work. Whereas maybe before, when I was younger, I would have been like, oh, I don't really want to talk about how I'm spiritual. That's just my spiritual practice. But as I get older, even more so mystical, and wanting to look at other mystics and walk their path, which is one of being eccentric and making your own medicine and grinding your own herbs to make a salve to address that. And, you know, just all these, you know, go and wander out in the woods like this piece is about, or, you know, play around with masks to dissolve one's identity in order to experience the landscape of nature deeper. Hopefully that answers that.
Yeah, well, and to be clear,
Hi.
Where'd you go, Noah?
they've been in and out.
Yeah,
Oh.
they and she. I should actually put my pronouns on
Yeah.
my thing here. Yeah, and put your pronouns, because that's that important stuff we got to do.
Here you go, Noah. He's been in. They've been in the house.
Yeah, they and she. I should actually put my pronouns on my thing here. Yeah, and put your pronouns. Hilarious. Because that's that important stuff we got to do.
Here you go, Noah. He's been in. They've been in the house.
Yeah, they and she. Why we have like an echo of echoes
on my. No, you look so cute.
That's amazing.
I love your haircut.
I'm really confused. I'm hearing like
Same. It's like layering.
I know. I didn't even know what I did. That was like, there was your mistake right there, turning into
You got a little
something.
feedback.
And it's making its poetry yet again.
Right.
All of you.
But yeah, I want to officially welcome everyone. We just started chatting right away, which is wonderful.
Yeah, so I was wondering, were those flowers, they were from the piece where you were in sort of a lace and pearl mask almost, and a white suit, and you had like this long piece of wood.
Yeah.
With the camera. So where were you when you made that?
Yeah, these are for this new piece, Hereaclitus the Wanderer, and it's the piece that's the piece that I'm on pause. But as soon as I finish my yellow exhibition, I'm gonna go back into work. I wanted to never be that artist that pauses on a work, because I love the momentum of building towards something. But what I found is actually it's very healthy to stop a project, let it sit for 5 years, which is what this project has been, and then come back to it. It's like a relationship. You've spent time apart so that you know to come back to it with something that is really meaningful, rather than this like, I gotta finish this thing. I said I'd finish this thing. I feel like, artists really, and creatives, the more understanding you can be about your own process and forgiving it when you're like, God, I can't force this piece, it's not ready, then don't. Live your life. And then when you come back to it, it'll be the right time.
I keep telling this story, and maybe Noah. So there was this poet, I believe it was Robert Lowell, but Yale or Harvard or one of these Ivies. It's like, oh my God, you're one of the best American poets. We want you to be dean of our poetry department. And they responded, they were like, absolutely not. Like, I need my crappy job as like a bank manager or whatever they did to write my poetry. Like, art happens from life, and when you try and like remove life from art making, it crumbles like sand. And so we got to ruminate over our artwork. We have to ruminate over whatever our crazy tone that we're writing, because that's we have to live a little bit sometimes to realize what we're doing and what we're saying, I think.
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, so this piece, that branch is, from the woods, and I attached the camera. It's actually like a GoPro to the branch, so that the branch is leading the way. I mean, how do you make that interesting for people? Be like, well, I'm taking a walk in the woods and I'm wandering, and I'm thinking of Hereaclitus from 400 BC, and I'm trying to make meaning of my life. That's what the video is about. How's that become interesting for other people? So it's like, how sometimes I'll have a really cool idea for myself.
I thought that elevator pitch was pretty good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I still do it. I make work for myself. And then I get kind of this added bonus when I go, oh, wow, that really appeals to other people. Well, that's great because I need to make that for myself. I want to know these questions. It was a lot of fun filming with a stick because then it wasn't me behind oh my God, my shot. And that whole history, right, of patriarchy and people behind a comfortable lens in which to okay, that's a whole other conversation. So I love the idea that I could zigzag around with this camera on a branch, and I could go inside this thing with insects and no one would want to go in there, but the camera can go in there and it can film these things. And so I was filming like that. And then I realized that I'd started in the woods and then it became a walk in the psyche. Now, I wouldn't have known that if I hadn't set out to do the wandering walk. And now I realize what nature really does provide for us is a space for us to get in touch with ourselves. So yeah, then the film does, I am excited to, after the time that I've taken to live life, come back to this piece because I didn't force it to be ready before. Now I can really explore the textures of it. And it's very different work than all the stuff that I'm doing now. But at the same time, necessary, it's right, here I am in the windows, doing this performance about the depressed artist that gets COVID and then creates I guess this is my favorite, goes inside their brain to look at their neurochemistry and create this world to keep them company. And then it's oh, okay, then a wandering Hereaclitus, this character. And I'm excited to perform in the windows, but this character is, the dimension of the work with Hereaclitus, where I'm not this, tramp character or trickster character or buffoon or fool or, I'm trying to lose a sense of identity to have a spiritual experience in nature. So it's I actually have to I have to put on a show. It's it's in me. At the same time, it's in me to go wander in the woods, and they inform each other. They're almost necessary.
In a process where you are creating often for yourself, and it's something that is elaborating over time, and you're producing numerous disparate works, where is that threshold where you see it as being able to become something like this current show, where many of these things are turned into, at least for a moment, one thing that people are taking in at one time. What is that threshold?
Yeah, and it's in this thing, it's let's paint everything yellow, let's draw on everything, let's just create our own library. Let's just, I think that, well, not I think, I know that my desire to make things monochromatic is to control what is chaotic, for sure. And this scene is the artist studio. This is kind of my artist studio, whether I'm in a small little space that's clean. This is how I create. It's always, there's all this stuff happening, whether it's actually there or not. And so when I'm in a flow, again, it's just when you're dreaming, you're not even trying. You don't even say, oh, I'm going to have a really good dream. You just dream. And these are the optimal times in studio where you have peak flow. And then you don't even think of time, and you're not hurting yourself. You're not drawing too much. using your mania as a kind of sculptural material, and you really set up like, oh, can I paint on this? Can I turn this over? Can I inside this out? Can I pull this apart? Will this go together? You just don't edit yourself. You flow with the materials in your energy. Later, you look at it and go, huh, that's interesting that got created. But if I edited myself, I just sit on a drawing and I try and draw perfectly or something. So I think it's very much like how I set up this garden for all the weeds to come. Like, this is a lot of weeds. There's some beautiful flowers in there, but you wouldn't even be able to find them because there's too much. And am I interested in showing people the complexity of neurochemistry? Yes. The complexity of an artist's practice? Yes. On the he said threshold, like, oof, I like to dance on the edge, period. I do. And
Full stop.
there you go, right there, full stop. You know.
That was really the core of my question, is how to full stop in, as Noah said, a durational practice, something that expansive, that is of becoming,
What were you thinking about yellow, Noah? You'd mentioned you had.
Yeah, well, the first contact that immediately came to mind was performance artist Linda Montano, who came to Defibrillator. I'm taking over the screen for a second, but like she did like this project called 7 Years of Living Art, and each year in the cycle she would wear clothing of the same color and like be in a room of that color for like 5 hours. And so she moved through the 7 colors of the 7 various chakras, and the chakras are the energy bodies, the energy centers of the body, and they're all aligned like with the spine, with like different like organs and stuff along the spine. And I'm gonna stop sharing for a second.
That's
And
beautiful.
yeah,
That's
no,
beautiful.
and specifically, the yellow chakra is it's the third chakra. It's like right at your solar plexus, which is also like such an important organ. I think also, isn't solar plexus like a really big one for Deleuze? I mean, I know y'all are like philosophy, but yes, exactly. It's power, it's control, as you said.
Power.
Hereaclitus.
Yeah,
It's
identity, pride.
all about power. It's all
Yeah.
about confidence. Actually, confidence
Yeah,
is the name of the
confidence.
game. And of course, like the chakras, it's something that you want to keep open and balanced. And if there's a blockage, like if you're sick or something else, like you will have like emotional or physical like symptoms. And like psychoactively, I think even just like
So
thinking
true.
about like what does it mean to have too much confidence, or what does it mean to be like underconfident or like nervous or worried, and how are these like manifestations of like a lack of balance in like that solar plexus, like yellow chakra. And I think that's like definitely something that's like coming up like in just like like this conversation about like the threshold of like balancing all those
Definitely.
things. So that was just one of the contexts that like I found and wanted to bring in. Yellow is just such a complicated and fascinating color to like play with and have as like a
Yeah.
monochrome,
Yeah.
and like is like a color that like is sometimes like associated with like miasma or like disease, like the yellow
Yeah.
wallpaper,
Yeah.
or like others
Totally.
like mm-hmm.
Totally. And I and I'm so glad you brought up Linda Montano, because I feel like she's like my art heroine for sure. I met her when she was in her first white year, crown chakra. I actually met her through my video teacher at the Kansas City Art Institute, who brought a group of us up. Hey, I brought a group of us up to Lawrence, Kansas, I think, is where Linda Montano was doing a meditation performance workshop. I did not know what I was getting myself into. It was probably the most formidable experience in art that I had, you know, and
What
I
year was that
honestly,
here?
this was 1987. So
So very formative.
very formative, and
Yeah.
she had us all laying on the ground, and we had to touch 3 different bodies of other people and create like a chain on the ground of a circle of bodies. And if we felt uncomfortable, we had to like try and make contact with more people, you know, like she's really pushing, talk about the threshold. And she also said, you know, we had to do meditation and vocal work and breath work. And, you know, she kind of like guided you through like, first you're going to sound ridiculous. Then you're going to get past the embarrassment, because then you're going to feel great because you went and you got it out. So, wow, she's a healer. And I made a sound like a boat motor as my like inner noise, which I remember getting past that point where I was embarrassed. And then it was like a rhythm and a motor of expression that came over me, where I wasn't worried at all how I sounded or what I looked like. And so I got to meet her, and then later I got to be in one of her performances and just geek out all around, because that's my hero. But I also felt like not everyone in art school was like a Linda Montano, the way I was. And I was like literally living my life like in a painting. I was like wearing my paintings as hats, became these like sculptural hats. And that's kind of how I started out. You know, I didn't start out with the concept of what I wanted to do. I just started wearing my paintings around, and people are like, you should videotape that. And I'd be like, oh, okay. You know, it's like, are you going to perform? Yeah, I am. You know, are you going to sing? Are you going to dance? Sure. But it was never like part of like what I wanted to do. It was just that I stepped into the painting. The painting led me. That's the blur. That's the blur of art life. And the spiritual part too. And Linda Montano has been like a guiding force, you know, throughout my work, because as an artist, she just grew and evolved. And then, you know, I got to just be a fan person majorly, and still am you know, not just her practice, which is like that philosophy, but it's also that a really clever trickster will put you in a situation with some tools and coax you there. And then you're like, wow, this is therapy. Or wow, this person just got me to start talking about my dad in public with other people. And now we're talking about grief together. And so she's so clever and yet committed to what she does, that she goes way past a performance, way past what a happening is. She's doing really deep spiritual work. And there's that blurring of art and life again.
It's the transcendent.
It is the transcendent. Yeah. And so I guess I also forgot to say that I really wanted to tell everyone the story of why yellow, because a lot of funny things happened. When I got COVID, one of the things happened is my liver wasn't working well, and I got those weird COVID toes, and I looked at the bottom of my feet when I was in such a high fever, days on end, just laying there. And my feet had a yellow callus that wrapped around, you know, not just like detoxing, but like a yellow callus, and it wrapped around my toes. And I thought, am I going to die? Like, this is like the beginning. You're like kind of grayish blue, you know, you're so bloated, you're not eating, you're just in a hospital room in your living room. And I just thought, I was like making peace with my life. I was making peace with, is this my time? And I started to think of other experiences with yellow, and I remembered my drag mom. And my drag mom was an artist, David Gilmore, that went to the Kansas City Art Institute, who was a fiber artist who worked in performance and also in sculpture. Now here's an artist that I totally apprenticed with, because he was a queer artist who was meticulous about craft, constantly challenging materials, you know, hand dyeing silk to stretch over wood sculptures, to make the music in the video, to perform in them, to have these outside, you know, like that's the person who inspired me. And David would do drag, and he did abject drag, you know, where he'd like stuff his belly with pillows and his buttocks with pillows and just be like, you know, out. When we were surrounded by all these queens and this incredible queer scene in Kansas City in the late 80s. And I was just a child watching that going, wow. Like, so that was my drag mother, and they ended up going to Yale in sculpture. So who decided to follow in their footsteps like a good little ducky? I totally did. And David became sick with AIDS pretty early on. And, you know, he, you know, it was like he didn't get to finish his time at Yale. He didn't get to go on to have all these solo shows. He was just this phenomenal queer artist, along with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of creatives that we lost to AIDS. And his lover, Ashton, who I was close with, told me that when David was getting ready to pass, he started to get jaundice all over his body. And he said, I'm gonna own it. And, you know, made super tall platform shoes, painted them yellow, dyed his hair yellow, wore yellow makeup, wore the yellow turtleneck and the yellow 3-piece suit, and just went right in. And I was like, oh, wow, that's what I have to do to not only memorialize my intense experience with COVID, but to memorialize like these, yeah, like this queer inheritance that I hold the stories of. You know, I didn't realize how important it is that we do the work we're meant to do and express ourselves even in the most eccentric way, or play with the threshold, because we're actually telling a story that not everyone's heard yet. So their stories live in my stories. And I was like, had to tell that story of, you know, my drag mother isn't with us, but, you know, I carry that flag of being like, that's the artist that inspired me in art school. And that's one of the reasons why yellow.
And you know, it's funny because our stories seem so familiar to us, but you know, to everyone else, our stories are always a mystery, right? You know, and so there's this weird process of needing to tell stories over and over again, because you know, and sometimes you're really close to a person and it's like, yeah, dad, I've heard that story a million times, dad. But there's an importance to that, because it is the first time for somebody, and especially in art making, for a lot of us, it's the first time hearing that story. And there are certain stories that deserve to be retold over and over again. And so was your experience with David, did that inspire, because you've been in love with yellow for a long time?
Yeah, you know what's interesting is yellow is not my favorite color. Pink is my favorite color. And I never intended for yellow to be this uniform. I ended up when I was living in the woods for a year, I ended up in this mountain in Tennessee, and I got to live in the Airstream there and just take care of the sculptures in this sculpture. It's a really cool, basically it's called the Yellowbird Art Farm. So it's just what that sounds like. And I dyed all my clothes yellow, got the yellow boots, and I said, I'm just gonna draw birds all over my clothing, and I'm living this Airstream, and I'm just gonna live this fantasy. Yellow is the uniform right now. It's what I've inherited. Uh, and that's also interesting too, because then I could look back at past work and see, oh yeah, there were yellow pieces that I did before. I didn't realize continuity. Um, and then later, as my own interest in learning about Reiki and then becoming a Reiki practitioner myself, is that okay, yeah, now we're really thinking about energy and aura, and yellow is connected to me. But I do think it's also a place to talk about, like, it is disease and it is caution. It isn't just sun, and how we think of color. There's also a painter who said, oh, yellow paintings are the hardest paintings to do. And I was like, I gotta try that out. I gotta test that out. Let me make some like ugly yellow paintings. Of course, can't make ugly art if you're like in love with your art process. Even if you make something that is, what is ugly anyway. But like I love all of my things, is even the things that are just like, whoa, that's just a sketch. It plays a part in a large biosphere, and it's important. But that's how I feel about my team, because sometimes you'll do a little sculpture, a little drawing, and it's really strange and you won't really understand it. You put it up on your wall, and then there's like a time where you're a little depressed or something, and you'll see your little drawing like talking to you. And then I'm like, oh, that's why I drew that little thing, or that's why I made that little sculpture or that little puppet, so that it would look at me when I'm a little depressed, and help me snap right back into, oh, this is why I create things, so that they can surprise me.
I was somewhat curious about, which was, when did virality become like an explicit concern in this larger work? I mean, were you already thinking about it when you were sick, or was it something that only afterward that you realized was a part of these works? That's something that pulled some of the aspects of the works together.
Like viralness of the work, like.
Well, I mean, you even in one of them talk about, the virus explicitly. That seems like something that's very, very conscious. But you also seem to recognize quite quickly the like relation of yellow to sickness, despite having done yellow work prior. So was it a mix of the two, of like consciously trying to produce something that was going to talk about this experience, but at the same time then drawing on what you had done in the past and seeing these kind of tendrils that had reached out into things that you had done before?
I like the idea of the tendrils, because I do think that when my work is around me, it is like where you're taking a walk in nature and the branches like tickle your ear and you're like, oh wow, you're right, there's a tree there. And I do feel like the yellow work did represent a deep depression I had, and it was it calmed me down to do all that yellow work. And I thought a lot of the yellow work I did was really scary. And it was hard to look at. It's even hard to look at now, because I could see my suffering. And, that was all neurochemistry, and that was then. And I've sort of put everything in a big bin, and I didn't have, and I wasn't, so like composting, I was composting. That's what I mean to say. right? Like I just let the natural process happen. And it was like surviving COVID gave me this sense of like, oh my God, I'm alive and I survived. And that I could go and look at work that was hard to look at and reinvigorate it and just um, throw it up in the air and have it literally land and be like, wonderful, perfect, planned that all along. What's next? What do we create now? And my dreams then, whatever I had, I had been working on other work. And when I got COVID, I couldn't do anything. And rather than hang on to the frustration, it was really just about, I just want to live. And then when it was about all of the breath work and the daily meditation, and I just got way more spiritual than I already was, then I started being like, okay, I want to live, but just tell me what to do, like guide my work, I was praying, basically praying, and literally was told to tell my story. And so I would have gone and looked at any set of paintings or videos that I had in the past and said, oh, let's try these out. Perfect. This might work. And that's when I did that's when I did this piece with the puppets, because we were just kind of we were all trapped in the house. And I just said, no problem. I'm just going to use this as a time to really go deep in a neutral way and look back at 30 years of art, really, and make sense of it all. I feel a real synthesis from doing this work. Like other artists might look at some of the sketches they've done and go, oh, that's not a really good one, or this one's a really good one. Let me highlight the good one with no space around it. And I'm like, let me put the good one, let me surround it with everything, so that I'm not ever really privileging the walls of the gallery as a space for looking at art. I'm saying, hey, it's free and it's in the windows and you can look at it. And I want to do that more. I'm more interested now in like being a public artist and actually taking my work out of these galleries, which are a classist thing anyway, and say, hey, it's right here in the windows so that you can look at it, without having to go to this gallery where, it's also art in the public. So that means it's affected by the elements. There's only so much I can, like, I'm putting on a play in the windows, so you can't hear me. So all of a sudden I'm like, how do we do that? Well, we do it with mime. Well, let's learn all about that. And let's make our dance and our movement so engaging. And let's tell this story. That's a positive story and it's a tale, but it's a true story. And let's make it interesting so that, and I feel like, not that I want to I've been interested in so many stories, but not just one story. Like if my entire team sat down and said, we're just going to tell one story, then that's what at the yellow windows is telling one story, but from all these multiple synthesized collectives and teams, which is why I think it feels like a couple different artists did the windows. I didn't mean to cut you off, but yeah.
I cut you off. I'm so sorry.
No.
Just like thinking about like how like the windows are like this public space that like you're bringing. It's a public feeling, right? Like you were talking about like how yellow was for you, like in some ways really scary and really depressing, and just thinking about like what happens like when you like when you make that viral, when you like bring that into the window, and like suffuse your own emotions there. And yeah, I love the way, this is just one story within the window, but like that balloon that you have in the window of the smiley face, which is like the way I saw it, it was like a little bit sickly, and it was like
Yeah.
Inflated and wrinkly. And I'd
Yeah.
love to hear you talk more about like that smiley face because like I feel like the smiley is like such a history, like it like is this gross sort of like commodified thing of like this like self-help industry or like corporatization of like happiness, which is something that like a lot of like queer theorists have like sort of like unpacked and deconstructed. Like Sarah Ahmed talks about like the feminist like killjoy, and Lauren Berlant talks about like cruel optimism and like how like what you desire can actually like hurt you, and like what's underneath the mask of like that smiley, and also like the countercultural like ways that like the smiley face has been like appropriated by like acid house and like psychedelic culture,
Right.
like there's so much like in like it's not just one story, it's like all these things, right? Like we put on a happy face in the window and it's like, well actually like there's a lot going on there.
Right. I'm looking for an image of that one. I'm like, I know which one you're talking about. Um, but so maybe like, okay, so you obviously the smiley face and that way that that wasn't a pre-articulated collage element where I was like, oh, I've got this balloon and I'm going to attach it to this figure and I'm going to put it in the windows. Um, that's just not how I work at all. And to get that moment, you kind of just have to put up all the yellow drawings and you have to like duct tape all the yellow things together. And that's why that's also why that's the why that is why that's the artist studio rather than like, hey, here's my exhibition and it's called the yellow installation. Everything's yellow. In fact, I wanted it to be really clear that that is the artist studio and they try out all these different mediums. And sometimes there's a really beautiful moment like that smiley, like deflated smiley face balloon. And, sometimes like those things become puppets in the window so that it's not me always engaging in the window, like that I wanted to set up little scenarios where they could start to perform, because this goes back to like why I started out just wearing my paintings on my head, was because I was asking more questions of what art could be rather than staying with what the system says art is and where art belongs, and challenging that. Sometimes obviously not everything's going to be a pearl. In fact, you gotta deal with all the sand and the grit and the slime that are in that, that are in the windows. In order to experience the windows, you gotta kind of look through all that other stuff to see if maybe this is a picture that I'm looking for, one with that face. Oh, there it is back there. Yay. So you've got to be okay with having a little bit of the rough edges, and in order to create the environment for like that one to emerge, because that's how that emerges. That emerges because you're over there just filling up that space, or you're painting all these books to make your own library, to make your own books, as you're making your own world. And you're putting a lot of, like I really wanted to I wanted people to go by the windows and make their own story by looking at it. Because that's really interesting to me, is you just get someone to look at something a little bit longer so that they can have an experience of it, not so that they can be like, witness you as the artist creating this thing, but more because that's art that just separates people from the art. I'm more interested in having someone have an interesting alchemical or neurochemical experience from looking at art, At least that's why I create it, so I can have that kind of experience looking at it.
This is a relatively simple question, based on a couple things that you've mentioned, including the patriarchal aspect of being behind the camera, the distancing of yourself from the privileging of a piece within the gallery, also bringing your studio to the gallery. So when you worked within this kind of television context, this it's the Lumpen TV, right? Did you have a similar perspective on like how you wanted to approach that medium, and what ways you could subvert? What were the tendencies and functions of television?
I did, and I really enjoyed my residency is over because I already did those videos there, which was incredible. But sometimes you can look at all that tech and that gear and keep it so like just it's fancy and it's austere and it's like hermetic, and like how do you use it to like make noise? And like the work of Nam June Paik was really something I was thinking about, because he was interested in like putting magnets on televisions and like getting televisions kind of be inside it out. He took them apart and he invented things. So I knew that looking at Lumpen TV's setup, I could either be like, wow, yeah, 5 cameras and all that chroma key. Look at that. What can we do there? Instead, I was like, oh, I definitely need to create something interesting in here. So it's like going back into like 300 videos and being like, let's just I Ching, pull them out of the hat and put them and kind of create themes and work that's from like 25 years ago, put it next to work that's like 13 years ago. And let's just like have, we don't even know what's going to happen with this interaction. And let's expose a little bit of the like glitch of that too, rather than this like seamless flow, because I'm much more interested in maybe that dissonance, so that when you do get that little bit of harmony, it's like a bird whistling. But it's not like we're going to have bird whistles throughout the work. I'm interested in that space that is more before the bird whistles. You know what I'm talking about, the bird whistle? Like I'm like,
Well,
this is Wallace Stevens.
it's I mean that's the like artist's joy. It's like trying to share the joy of creation, because you were talking about how typically you go to a gallery, it's like this work has been chosen to be shown, that there's been a privileging process, you kind of called it. And the actual magic though of creation is, it's like you write 10 poems and you're ready to quit because you hate them all, and then you turn over a napkin, between going to the bathroom and going back to work,
Right.
write down 10 lines, and it changes your life.
Changes your life.
But part of that though is the like 10 trash poems you just wrote, and that's what makes the illumination happen.
Yeah, the illumination. Yeah, because if you edit yourself too much, you don't turn on the faucet to really let the stuff out, like to really get the words on the paper. And I've done that before, where I just lit a candle and said, okay, let's just channel, let's just write everything that comes. And, out of the stuff is something interesting, but you've got to kind of go through the stuff. I also find that sometimes with paintings, I'm just pushing paint around and I'm looking at the painting going, fuck, oh wait, this is my thing. I guess I can swear in it. Excuse my French. Darn it. Oh my stars. But like you look at your painting, you go, I don't like that. Why don't I like that? Why don't I like that little moment? What is it about that little moment? Then there's other times where you push the paint around and you find something like, oh my God, what is that? I totally see a whole series in just that. And so you don't know where you're going to be at any corner in your painting, pushing, pull. You could be like, wow, I don't like the way that looks, or wow, I love the way that looks. And so spending time painting is where the joy comes for me. So spending time playing with materials rather than go, oh wow, this is chroma key. I have to really calm down, think about the seamlessness of what I can do when I change this background. Whereas I'm much more interested in, you know, how that becomes my hand. I'm in my painting and I'm holding on to a branch, you know. I'm more interested in like what happens when you play with that. And so was Namjoon Pike, because Namjoon Pike decided to do this amazing video piece out of all of them, you know. I'm thinking of the one where he had Merce Cunningham come and dance behind the backdrops of what he's created, but he was really interested in and taking this other artist and putting them in these other histories. And I thought, well, I could just put myself in my old work and then not only have all this work competing for space and attention, but rather than look at this work and say, oh, that's my neurotic work, that was my over obsessive work, or that was like art therapy work, experimentation work, I go, who cares? Throw it in. Let's see what happens, you know? And that's what that residency allowed me to do. But I'm glad that I approached it that way. There it is. There's my friend, right? And so, oh, yes, exactly. And I mean, I'm just learning from Namjoon Pike, you know, how to, you know, he took apart the televisions. And you know, you were talking about like how you were talking about writing. And I remember there was this writer that said, you know, the work you do on one poem affects all the other poems you are to write. So you could labor over a poem for like 6 months or 6 years. And then as soon as it turns, yes, as soon as it turns, all the other poems are written in one night. Or like that one composer who just did 32 symphonies in one night. And I love that kind of title creation because it's just kind of like you're doodling, and then before you know it, all the paintings have already painted themselves. You just literally held your hand and they just all got painted. And I do love the quantity over quality as just because of the energy of that. And I am different than obviously a conceptual minimalist artist, although they could be just as influenced by Dada and Fluxism as me. I just tend to be over in the maximalist. What else can I put on? What else can I paint? Can I paint this? But I like to put myself in those spaces to be challenged. So, but yeah, like the Keith Haring was the artist that I was so inspired by, because it's like, I knew I could draw realistically. I was more interested in the world and what could art be for someone else. And Keith Haring not only like was like, okay, I can take something so simple and I could just go with it, but I can use it to communicate what's happening in my community. You know, I'm losing my lovers, I'm losing my friends, I'm losing everyone. And how can I use this simple drawing, but like post it all over town? And that's also like what the, you know, like my favorite artists like Hugo Ball and Cabaret Voltaire, that was a political operation. And they were like, we'll put on a show, we'll do performance art, but it's all for politics. And we're revolutionaries and we're activists. And I've always just aligned with that. I mean, I do think of myself as an activist. I'm being very political with the mediums I choose or don't choose, you know? But who wants to speak
Acknowledges
to that?
that political and the personal, right? You know, I mean,
Yeah,
pretty much everything we do is political if you really want to think about it. And so
yeah.
you can embrace your politics, but still express yourself.
Yeah.
Some might say that's the actual more revolutionary act, actually, is living radically than forcing everything into this, preordained political cue.
Well, yeah, it's messy. Emma Goldman's like, if I can't dance, I don't want to be a part of your revolution. And I feel that,
I love her so much.
I love her too. And all the artists, they're like act up artists that are like, we're gonna dance in the streets and we're going to teach you what's really happening. I do feel that culture's neutered that experience where we're not given these places to even rebel the way that we could dance in the streets, the way we could put on art parade happenings. And I'm like an old artist from that time. I mean, I'm not old, but like the artists I look at are from, I mean, I'm interested. I look at them. I look at Hugo Ball and I'm looking at what they did. Much more so than I'm looking at the New York abstractionist painters. Bless them all. It's just, I'm not really looking at them as much. That's not, if I was just interested in making paintings, I would just make paintings. And I have an interest in making paintings. But I'll get there when I really feel like, oh, wow, I really just want to make this painting. And, the small ones behind me, these are more like studies for things. But I feel like I feel like I'm a political artist. If I work in this medium, I'll make it political. But I'm not going to do something because someone's like, you really need to sell some paintings. I need some two-dimensional work. I don't want to work in that way because then I know I'll be trying to control the process. It's like, could you do this all in green? I'd like this all in baby blue. I'd be like, no, that someone else could do that. Some other artist can do that. But I'm much more interested in what happens when I don't get to have all of those controls. And I allow chance or or I say, what is the right medium for this piece? Or I pray on it, or I meditate on it, or I journal on it. I know that doesn't seem like I'm that person from my window studio. It looks like I just live in this chaos, but it's not like that at all.
I was wondering, your body and your experience of your body went through something quite substantial. While you have this enormous body of work that's highly expansive, that's heterogeneous, right? Did you feel a need in telling the story of the depressed artist in COVID, of like taking pieces and trying to, paint some picture that would be expressible to others? Or was that just something that was in the background internally, and that externally it was more about what you were talking about earlier, these kind of crystals that can be born from the experience of someone just passing by and seeing something amidst the chaos of your multiple works?
I would almost say, gosh, I wish in hindsight I had known that it's actually a lot of work to make so much work that I thought I was like ahead of the curve. Like, I'm like, well, a lot of these things aren't physical objects. They're just digital things, or they're digital videos. But now it just, I realize that you know, as an artist, it was like I was broke and I couldn't afford to do paintings. I couldn't afford to do video installations. And so I just started performing in costumes. And then maybe that work was also like, let me just make something happen rather than wait for a show to come to me. And then it's like, okay, well, now you just got a legacy of that kind of stuff. And I'm grateful, but I would almost say to like the younger artists now, you know, maybe don't need to make every single thing. Actually, it's important to, you don't need to. The world doesn't need more junk. I knew I had my process. So I'm working in a way that is a lot more synthesized now. But first I kind of exploded. Then now I'm like, oh wait, is this important? Is this part of this piece? I do, I also think that was a really interesting question because when I got COVID, all these things in my system started breaking down. It wasn't like, oh, it's just these lungs, or, you know, it was like with post-COVID syndrome, it was gastrointestinal, it was liver, it was kidneys, it was even brain, you know, for the longest time, brain fog that, you know, really, and chronic fatigue. So I did feel like my body was it was out of control. I didn't even know how to handle it. You know, like I landed in the ER with like heart pain and my legs swelling with fluid, and they were like, well, it's not a pulmonary embolism, but I was in the ER for 7 hours. So COVID wrecked my body, and it didn't matter if I had all these, you know, positive intentions behind I'm going to tell my story. I also had to go slowly. So there were a lot of ways where I had to speed up and slow down, or allow for speeding up at times and slowing down to digest the work, and, you know, and keep the momentum, so that I do think that like my piece is about the chaos of having COVID wreck your immune system, because, you know, in that artist studio, you've got something like a beautiful little drawing next to all this chaos. That's how it felt to be like, I think I'm healthy, but all of a sudden my heart is still hurting. And they don't know why your blood is rushing around the right way. Everyone with COVID is different. And they say that everyone's got different symptoms from COVID. And I'm a long hauler too. So even though, yes, I put together this show, a lot of this work I had been making prior to getting COVID. And it was all like, well, I don't know what this is. But then it's like, once you put this together, you're like, oh, that's exactly where that belonged. That's that, you know, I don't know if that kind of goes around the question of like thinking of my body of work and the body in COVID. I'm actually really happy that I've made so much work. My artist ego is like, well, great, I did that. I did that one. Oh, and I did that. But it's the other part of like, well, there's a lot of stuff to collage with. There's a lot to like weave together or synthesize or redo or, you know, play off of. And I didn't think of that a priori. I wasn't like, I'll make a lot of characters and then I'll have them all talk. I wasn't thinking like that. Or I'll make a lot of art and then I'll have it all interact. But now that that's what I've put in motion, I'm like, oh, this just makes me realize I should always be totally committed to what I do, because it's probably a couple steps in front of me and then I'm learning.
It's funny here, like we've been chatting about Kant for a while, and it's you said sort of is jarring things loose in my brain, because something I've been thinking about a lot is that, you know, sort of where faith comes from is this fact that, yeah, we do all this stuff a priori. We create all these things without knowing why. but the answer, our knowledge, is always in the synthesis. And it's the synthesis is always happening even when we don't know it's happening. And I think sometimes, particularly with art, that is the faith that's required, is knowing that even though we don't know why we've created all these things quite yet, that they're all coming to something. It's like you're saying, where
Yeah.
all of a sudden you write 30 symphony, or 30 sonatas in an evening,
Yeah.
because it's been building up inside of you. And sometimes that the unity of our creations doesn't happen immediately, right? There's like a
Right.
succession to it.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I was thinking of, the point about the symphonies, or the poem that makes all of the poems you have written in the past. It seemed like almost a what could be conceived of as a non-artistic experience, that of an illness, became something that you were able to mold into something out of all these disparate elements, right? Like
Yeah.
like almost the state that came after it allowed for you to put these things together into a story, as you called it.
Yeah, definitely. And and I had I didn't I knew I was a tough person. I knew I was kind of fierce, actually. And as a performance artist, for sure, I strapped all that stuff on and got on stage and done the performance, even though I'm getting booed and food's being thrown at me. But like, I had that fierce, like, I'll do it. I'll show up for the work, the materials, or the idea. And, but with COVID, it brought me to my knees. And, I've always been a spiritual person, but I mean, when you think you're going to die, you're in the, like, you're in surrender mode. And I had such spiritual experience that, like, I was able to look back at my whole life with this integrity. Whereas maybe before I would have been like, wow, yeah, that, wow. When you have that kind of experience, you're just like, oh, life is so beautiful. I can breathe. And that's where, I mean, some people might see chaos in the window, and I just think, wow, that's alive. That's alive. Because I know what it was like when I had COVID. And if I had a negative thought or a worrisome thought, and this is, early in March, I got COVID March 15th. And, at that time, we didn't really know enough. We had so much fear. Everyone had conspiracy theories. It was crazy. And people are like, take vitamin K and blow dry your nose hairs. And I was just doing everything to kind of save myself. At the same time, I was discovering calm, which was a new, like, calm on a, like, not even like my calm that I know of when I don't know, when I'm in like walking in nature, but like deep states of calm you get when you meditate or when you journey. And it's an out of body experience, really. But I was having those all day long, because if I had fearful thoughts, it immediately tightened something in my chest. And when you tried to breathe, it felt like little tiny pieces of glass. And the first thing you're going to think is panic. And you can't, because that constricts it more. And, you have chest pressure because it feels like someone's sitting on your chest. So I pushed past all the performance, all the personas, and I pushed past even my own self-doubt or insecurities or neurosis, or all gone, where I just became a machine of breath to be present and to really control my thoughts, so that once I moved through that illness, I had those skills. It was like Zen, basically. I think it's what allowed me to create in the swell I did once I was able to. And I mean, that's still going to bed at like 9 or 10. But, you know, and COVID still, I need 9, 10 hours of sleep every night from COVID. COVID is still something I'm really listening to my body. Now, I wouldn't have thought that my body as a physical body would become so important in my art practice, because I'm such a heady intellectual person. I'd rather be like up here, just playing around. Instead, I had to get so somatic and so into my body to the place where I go, oh yeah, that we're not working. We need to rest. And that's something I feel like COVID was just working on me to get me to just relax. I do think people could survive COVID if they can relax and rest. That was the most important thing for me, but it took months. It wasn't like, oh, I just got COVID, it's a 2-week thing. I wasn't able to walk down the street and not have that pneumonia in both lungs until May. So that gives you an idea of like, it was like 3 months of really being in rest mode. And that's how I survived COVID. And I feel like that did teach me more about, well, I think I said fierce before, but I'd say like the life in me. We take it for granted. You know, how do we talk about, wow, I'm just so grateful to be alive. So my work is alive. It's alive. In fact, the work that is sort of number, I've put all the work that's alive around it to kind of like, that's where I'm a neuroscientist. I'm like, here, let's see what happens if we get these neurons to wire together. You know, like that's what I set up in the windows. I feel like I should put another fun picture of this bird. That's one of my crows.
Back, it's singing.
Yeah, it's one of my crows, and I make these birds so they'll just stare into my soul. I definitely don't. I'm the kind of artist that doesn't like follow a sketch. It's more like, whew, it just comes through. Sometimes I wake up with a vision of everything and I'm like, not now. I'm waking up. I don't want to make art in my mind, but my brain can give me sometimes an entire vision of something. And then I'm like, okay, you're right. We got to paint that. How do we do it?
The art we make in our minds, I think, is the hardest to realize. You know, it's like, because everything seems so precious then, because it's like, well, I already painted that. It's just in my brain. No one can see it, you know, like.
Totally. And then other times I create something, I go, that's way better than the vision I had. Wow. You know, like that was sort of like what I saw. But I have to also learn to balance that. You know, COVID and my immune system, you know, my immune system was depleted. And that's another reason why I got COVID, you know. And a lot of that was my depression, you know, like that is the thing. So I wouldn't have thought, hey, I'm going to make a piece about being depressed and using my art as therapy. I would have never said, let me make a play about that. But that's what we're doing. And probably because maybe I didn't want to tell the truth like that. I'm more interested in telling tales rather than go, well, actually, no, I'm the depressed artist. And, you know, here I am in the windows. I wonder how to move that around. They don't let me move it around.
Well, it's like what you were saying with Linda Montano, where it's like, you know, it's like, wait, why am I revealing these intimate things all of a sudden? I think when we make art, you know, we never set out to, oh, I'm going to work on this trauma now. It's only after you do it where you're like, oh my God, was I talking about my mom the whole time? Like,
right. I know, right. Right. And there is, so I felt that with COVID, I turned a corner on making work or reflecting upon past work that was really about trauma. And I'm grateful that I made work about my trauma, because
Mhm.
that's one, being with a qualified professional therapist and hypnotherapist, or how I really worked daily with trauma, and years and years and years for sure. But making work meant that I really unearthed things. And that is also when I started working with shadow too. And that also became a really, um, a place to, to celebrate my resiliency. But I still felt that work was more like, wow, that's in that one box or closet up there on that shelf. I don't want to trigger myself to go back and look at it. Let's just keep moving onward. And after COVID, I was able to go and look at the strange creatures in the closet and go, I understand you now. I understand this work with the shadow, or I understand this darker work, or I understand this triggering work. I have a place for you in my play. Actually, I have a story to tell, and I have a different relationship now, which actually just, sometimes you do making yourself vulnerable by like playing this depressed artist back here. I mean, I'm playing this mime playing a depressed artist, which is so much fun. But I am making fun of myself and not making fun of myself, but I am playing the fool to you have the depressed artist surrounded by their art. They're so depressed, all they see is yellow. And they're so depressed they can't make work anymore, because depression's serious. And in the play, they get sick with COVID, which totally challenges what's supposed to happen. And they end up in their mind with all these fabulous creatures. And they kind of fall in love with the creative process again, because they really use it to keep them company when they're sick. And that's when I used Paul Eluard, the Surrealist poet's poem. It's called At the Windows. And he talks about, he's basically just staring out the window and he's looking at the reflection. He's kind of hallucinating on the reflection and seeing a whole world, and everything becomes alive. And that's how it feels when you're sick, actually, is, you have these high fevers and you go into your fantasy dream world. And it was like, that's what happened to the depressed artist, is that the depressed art, what do you have so much? Why are you so depressed? Go inside your neurochemistry. And, with my depression, there have been times where my brain is static and it's very serious. It's not like this at all. It's just, but I work with it. I work with my neurochemistry to get it to this is what it is. That's inside my brain, which means there's unlimited possibilities. This is the parietal lobe of the artist's brain. That's what this purple window is. And this is where all the thoughts come together, all the fabulous creatures, all of the connections. And, and that's what leads to then the artist like goes into the studio and just creates and tells the story. But it's like what saves the artist from the depression is really looking at their neurochemistry as this fantastic environment. And even if depression is something that's neurochemical, then I'm also saying something about the surrealist attitude of, because the surrealists are really interested in just our dreams. And so, and the collective unconscious, and putting things together that don't make any sense at all, then sometimes a depressed brain is the best parts of the parietal lobe, where before thoughts come together, they're all floating around and everything's alive. You know, usually our day to day, we use our brain in not very creative ways at all. But to step into the parietal lobe of one's brain is the poetry. It's where everything is flowing. True, we can't just exist in there. And so sometimes we can get lost in a parietal lobe. Or we can be like, well, is this a dream? Especially when you have a high fever. And so I did create that window for that experience, you know, for that experience of this is a dream, but this is also how I'm gonna, there's the purple window. This is how I'm gonna survive COVID, is by entrusting my fantasy world. So that's why I called it At the Yellow Windows, because it's really, I literally put Paul Eluard's poem is the backdrop for my whole play. That plus my story. My story is so simple that I can do that.
Yeah, it's funny because the window, you know, right? It's like also like a screen, right? It's also like this, you know, almost like the TV that you have, you know, the little thing you have.
Yeah.
You know, it becomes this viewing box, like an aquarium.
Totally like an aquarium.
But it's funny hearing you talk about this. It's also like a petri dish, right?
Yeah.
It's also this portal where we can see things grow and change. And it's funny because I think the allure of the screen, right, the allure of the computer is that there's this false sense of safety. And it's the same thing with the petri dish. It's like, well, that's going on in there. That's not going on in here. That's going on in there.
Yeah.
And it becomes this way for us to internalize things in this way that we feel that's safe, you know, but it never is. It's always it always burrows in, I feel, you know. You know.
I feel like I was honing in on a similar element. In one of the television pieces that you did, the one where you had the long poem, where you were talking about people, or maybe the artists, the teaching artists, the teacher, the scholastic, not being able to admit almost the content of a touch, right?
Right.
And here you see that, like, these bodily experiences, they have exploded out into a frenzy of your art, both past and present, and potentially in the future. And so I guess this was the last thing I wanted to ask you about, is, as you describe yourself as a very cerebral artist, right? And that this has almost had a kind of pragmatic effect on the need to put these things all together. Do you see a relationship between this expression in general and what you felt expressed through the body, or do you feel that it is something greater, something that cannot be expressed, and that this is, as you put it, a play, that it's almost an abstraction of it?
I feel like there's, in so many of my past work, there was like, I love it that we talked about petri dishes, that I was a little bit of a mad scientist, and but like Madame Curie, that like there's also this part of me that's like, actually, I really want to invent something that's like a healthy creative elixir that I can like give to other people. They can like buy it off my donkey cart, you know, going from like town to town. like rather than this artist that just keeps making all this work and all this eccentric stuff, if I'm going to create a world, I don't want to get lost in my world. I don't want to get lost in these petri dishes and these experiments, or get lost in the abyss, or lost in my constraints, my paradigm that I make work. I want to go out on the road and be like, what do people need? If I have these talents, maybe I'm supposed to be distilling them down into some essence that could be meaningful for people. Like, what is my art? What are my art forms? What are they pushing to synthesize? Because now I feel at the yellow windows, if there was a resistance to telling a personal story, I passed through that and said, actually, I'm going to tell my personal story. And because I wanted to help people. And now I don't feel this like, well, no, I only work in that medium, or no, actually, I really only like that kind of work. I feel my work's moved from being these like data experiments to being these really metaphysical experiences to now these like neuroscientists on very rogue neuroscientists. Like, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. That's what the machine's like producing, is not to go back and go, well, you're right, I'm really good at making that kind of work. Let me just go back and do a lot of that. People keep wanting me to go in that direction. And I'm like, no, wait a minute. We're getting closer to what we're doing here. And it isn't just to amass all this work, but I kind of had to make all the work to get to this place.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that next step is, but taking, maybe a kind of self-obsessed performance artist and having them do public art, and now asking myself and my work different questions. I'm excited to see what happens when I synthesize and respond to what the community needs, and how I can be of service as this creative force, rather than like, what do I feel like doing in the studio today? But that's maybe a larger question.
No, my question was pretty sprawling and ambiguous, and that was about as perfect an answer as I could get. How can work do things for people, or how can artwork do things for people? And it's in a different way than, how people imagine work. We have all these kind of debates that continually circle around, how realistically they painted before, and how abstract and I don't know, disparate it is from human experience or whatever. But actually, like, when you put yourself before it, this is activating things so much more than a simple representation of a landscape, because you have to think about it. You have to turn it over. You have to remember. You have to recognize, and in that process for the artist, there's this whole learning and working and living that's going on at the same time, and you just get like this kind of immediate point between the two things.
Yeah, and I was also looking at just like what Noah was saying about hyperproductivity and the collapse of capitalism and lost gigs and being unemployment, and then this artist residency mode. They also say for us to all write our King Lear. I totally forgot the story of King Lear, but this obviously must be my King Lear. It is kind of, I do feel that, I feel like I would have never known that artists would have to shrink everything down as they create. Like in my mind, I would have thought, oh, us artists, we're all going to be given these like bigger spaces to create things and galleries and all this stuff. And what I realized was that there were more and more artists and more creative, and it was more and more competitive. And it you know, it's like, you can't go back to a time of like Black Mountain College or where there's only a few creatives, but to be like, wow, there's a lot of us. And that now that's so wonderful because that becomes really tidal. I did feel that there was this kind of my work has been described as relentless to some folks, and there was this kind of like relentless experimentation, which I would have thought, no, I'm political, and I'm like, wow, that's this capitalism that exhausts my relaxed production, because I'm like, nope, gotta keep creating, keep making more. Even though, excuse me, to critique capital, but becoming a machine yourself. And then it's like, okay, well, there's schizophrenia right there. And I'm like, oh, how do I reverse this? I have to reverse this. You know, it's like I'm reading philosophy not so that I can just fall into the same abyss. I actually want to find a way to work through that and not get lost in that collapse myself. And so even though I've like, now I'm able to look at hyper productivity I had before with this gaze of like, well, wait a minute, this is interesting. Okay. But what happens if you just go take a walk in the woods? Like, you know, and put the camera on the end of the stick. Like, what happens when you're not this hyper productive artist? And maybe let's let that work breathe a little, because I'm not going to be very political if I'm just driving myself so hard to create. But of course, I didn't realize that until, you know, I really struggled with that and said, I've got to think more about what my body and heart need. This isn't just about my mind creating. And that's going back to that more somatic experience of creating in the studio, where you're like, oh, this is good, but it's time to go to bed. And in the past, I've been like, let's just stay up all night and paint that out. It's like, no, let's go to bed. Because in the morning, you're able to like fall in love with that paint again. But you can go to bed. The painting does not need to be done. Because that's like all those artists that exhausted themselves and died penniless and mentally ill. And I'm like, can we not do that? I don't want to do that one.
Yeah.
Tell the story differently. And that's like, artists can be smart, but let's not feel that they have to like read every book and exhaust the criticality of their work. They also should just play a little in the studio. That's when the smart art comes when you're not trying so hard to make it so smart. And I also think the expressive work comes when you're not trying so hard to express yourself. You're just being the self and letting the materials, you know, move through you rather than like your ideas. I'm not really interested so much in my ideas as much as I'm interested in the world. And obviously I'm going to filter it through my experience of being in the world. But the world's my muse. That's everything. I'm just babbling now.
No, that was wonderful. I actually, though, have to go to the bathroom and probably cut out.
Yeah, absolutely. We're getting to that, you know, where it's not like we have closing arguments or closing statements, or I just am excited that we got to have a talk. I'd rather than be like, I did this piece and I was working this. That's not interesting to me. I'd rather have a conversation about a work. I'm so interested in what art can do in the world. so I wouldn't want to just be like, well, look at what I've done. It's more interesting to have a conversation and have that work kind of be a part of the threads, or not. I guess it's like, yeah, like the threads, but we're the beans that are being woven. It's our experiences that are woven, you know?
Well, right. And your art is so about, removing the form, right? It's formless, and that's how I think we're able to move forward, because and sometimes it's nice to keep things contained in a petri dish, right? Because it makes it more intelligible, it makes it more understandable. But our life doesn't happen inside a petri dish.
No.
And this is the fun thing about all this, is that it doesn't have to follow a formula. It's expansive.
Right? Formula isn't really interesting anyway.
Yeah, unless it's an unsolved formula, and then
Yeah.
it becomes incredibly interesting, right? And so it's all about exploration, and because you never know it's what you're going to get. It reintroduces that element of chance again.
Yeah, and I'm so interested in chance. I mean, like Hugo Ball and the Cabaret Voltaire, like all those artists, they didn't say, oh, well, I don't have acting training, so I can't do that. They were like, I'm going to make up a poem. I'm going to make wings out of cardboard. I'm just going to speak in weird tongues and see what kind of performative stuff comes through me, which can be really challenging, actually. It can be really challenging. Oh, there it is. Let's read that poem. Oh, yes. Who wants to read it?
Want to flip a coin? I've not always had this certainty, this pessimism which reassures the best among us. There was a time when my friends laughed at me. I was not the master of my words. A certain indifference. I have always known well what I wanted to say, but most often it was because I had nothing to say. The necessity of speaking and the desire not to be heard. My life hanging only by a thread. There was a time when I seemed to understand nothing. My chains floated on the water. All my desires are born of my dreams, and I have proven my love with words. To what fantastic creatures have I entrusted myself? In what dolorous and ravishing world has my imagination enclosed me? I am sure of having been loved in the most mysterious of domains, my own. The language of my love does not belong to human language. My human body does not touch the flesh of my love. My amorous imagination has always been constant and high enough so that nothing could attempt to convince me of error.
Oh, I know, right? And Noah's like fantastic creatures. I know. You're like Jack Smith, one of my favorite artists, and seminal art that inspired me was Fantastic Creatures. And yeah, this Paul Eluard poem. I mean, he's really talking about this incredible like balance that you achieve in your life, where you love yourself, you accept yourself, you're clear on what you want, you have some clarity, you have a relationship to your art form that's really committed and internal and magical and never goes away, and you have some kind of like incessant need to say that to everyone, to express that in everything at the same time, keep it absolutely sacred, not an utterance, or almost like too much to say, too much love to share, that you're like, yeah, it's an amazing spiritual creativity. And then to, the poem being able to reflect and say, I haven't always been this clear. You know, I have a story to tell now, and I'm telling the story, but I haven't always been so clear. And I haven't always wanted to be clear. I wanted to be more obtuse, or I wanted to diffract, or I wanted to confuse or get lost in that. And now it's like, oh, I actually kind of want to be more clear. But of course, my way of being clear is it's this. This is clear. But it also showed me that I'm not there's histories of like artists that had political purpose and, fuse that political purpose with their art forms, like all the creatives that passed with AIDS that I got to experience. And these are like the artists that inspired me, that come through in my windows, because they come through in like my performances. Those are the fantastic creatures. They were the fantastic creatures I only heard of. I only dreamed of, many that just like David Wanarovich and artists that just like created works that, and then they were gone. And they're, like Paul Eluard actually passed away very early. They were sick most of the time with tuberculosis. And at the time, being in the infirmary was like where they were the most prolific, and I'm not saying that one has to have a near-death experience or must have a spiritual experience, but it wouldn't hurt to have a little spiritual or metaphysical experience if that's going to be a catalyst for a new way of thinking. I know the artists that inspired me, those queer artists, they took so many risks. Like with David, my drag mother, doing abject drag. Like I hadn't even begun to think of how I could perform in this, like in an abject persona and make people laugh, not because I'm like, a comedian, but because I'm becoming something strange and people are going to laugh because they're just like, what is that? So rather than like create, rather than, using, it's just like, rather than using your acting ability to say something about craft and history, it's like, use your acting ability to say something about politics and rise up and act up. And I feel like we're in a similar place. It's not tuberculosis and it's not AIDS, it's COVID. At the same time, there's ways we're coming together and coming apart, like an interesting time to be an artist, have these tools, and yet this isn't the time where we can just march in the street or like the act up artists that create all this art. We have to rethink how we're going to tell these stories, or what can artists or what can creatives say in a pandemic through their art forms.
It's the strange anti-capitalist opening of illness, because it stops production, it ceases that constant drive you were referring to earlier, and at times it gives us isolation and solitude, which is really vital for art making sometimes, even if you're stealing that solitude from yourself in a weird way, in times of of normal times, say, without pandemic, without illness. And it's unfortunate that, obviously any pandemic is unfortunate, but and it's unfortunate that we sometimes, it feels like society is almost calls out for these moments to do this type of work. And I think part of that, like, learning from this experience is like, how do we reincorporate that into our lives so it doesn't take a pandemic where we can, you know, like you said, Noah, like, you know, be our best artist in residence, you know. And yeah, it's a really difficult battle to fight. But it does offer us these glimpses and this excuse to slow down, right?
Ooh, I like that. It is an halt that capitalist production. It is, you know, and I think also just like, I mean, I made art out of just trash for real. And
Mhm.
I love that. You know, it's like I definitely want to show that you could be inventive with materials rather than spend money on materials. Um, you can you know, like you can transform you know, it's the alchemy. You can transform the everyday. And I am very anti-capitalist. I wish
Yeah,
everyone could have that time.
with the proper configuration, like, you can turn trash into treasure. You know, it's just about like figuring the right sequencing or something, you know. And that's the enlivening spirit of art, right?
Yeah.
It
Does
conjures
anyone,
vitality in us.
does anyone know the name of that artist? He was a janitor all his life, but he built this like
Oh,
palace
yeah.
religion all out of aluminum. And it was like this, it looked incredibly opulent, but it's something like that. And he was completely outside of the artistic community. This was something completely spiritual for him. But I think
Yeah.
the power, that creative power, that's just innate. It's just not tapped into.
You know, I'm such an outsider artist. They're like outsider artists are like my favorite artists. And some of my ideas, I'm like, wow, I'm a real outsider artist. But I'm an outsider artist that went to art school. So I'm kind of an interesting little creature, you know? Like there's got to be more of us where we're like we be outsider artists, but we actually have all this classical training. And the goal of the outside artist is the same as that I have. In fact, I find myself like my big project is to basically make an art residency out west and have a land conservation project. So buy a lot of land so I can create an art residency, and kind of like do where I was working at the Yellowbird Art Farm is, you know, have artists come and create sculptures on the you know, there and stay there and get to experience being in nature. I mean, that's kind of like the next steps for me are like how to take this on the road or how to help other creatives through their creative processes and to make um well, I'm always like, hey, let's distill down the, you know, the essence of suffering to make something strange and beautiful. And that's been my like little art statement that is like right next to me. But I changed it because it's not just like, hey, let's distill it down to this essence. I think I've done that. Now it's like, what's the story that the world really needs to hear? Because sometimes it's the fantasy, the sci-fi, the otherworldly, the bedtime, like what is it that the world needs? Because I'm the artist, it's like, I want to give that. I want to create something that the world needs or the people need. And whatever that is, it's not as important to me to create just objects that don't have a function. But it's not like I want to be really, you know, a didactic. I have really big ideas of what I'd like public sculpture to look like or public performances to look like, or, you know, taking my show on the road and what that would look like, and where it's not like I'm like, well, you started in the windows and now you're interested in the stage. I'm like, no, actually, I'd rather stay in the windows if I could. You know, the minute it starts to become these gallery spaces, then it's a whole other thing again, you know, and that's like the outsider artist that's like, I'm just going to, you know, turn my vehicle into an art car and I'm just going to go from town to town with my bells and my whistles and my puppets and my paintings, which is, you know, those are my closing thoughts, huh? Which is the next step. It's the next step for me.
It sounds much like what artists had the opportunity to do during the Depression, when the state actually gave some money to artists and sent artists to towns that saw no art. And
Wow.
it's been documented as a deep and transformative experience for these places.
I need to look into that.
Yeah.
What is where'd you read that stuff?
In books on FDR's art programs, I can try to find some
Wow,
titles.
FDR's art programs. See, that's the stuff I need to pull up, you know, when I'm like writing the creative capital and you're like, well, what do you want to do? Oh, well, I want to make a brain bus. It's kind of sculptural. It lights up and it goes from town to town. And I basically have a play about, the creativity of neuroscience, basically, and how just the neuroscience of creativity. And you know, you guys have your thing, which is like text of the matter, or text is the matter, is what I was saying in my mind. My project's very similar, and then it's like, you know, what cerebrally is a matter, what's cerebral matter. And I do feel like we have a lot of folks with depression. And do I want to be a traveling vaudevillian neuroscientist artist character that goes to educate in this entertaining way? Yes.
Yes. You should, speaking of the FSA and all those programs, watch the movie The Cradle Will Rock if you haven't seen it already. It's a interpretation of this guy who wrote a play about what was going on in the Great Depression, about what he was seeing, and they were trying to shut it down because of its communist sentiments. And
Really?
you'll love it. You'll love it.
Okay, let me write that down right now, because that is the word. Like FDR's art programs. I mean, see, that was the thing. Like my favorite avant-garde Czechoslovakian avant-garde filmmakers, the reason they made all those really cool movies was because the government gave them film and gave them money and said, yeah, we don't care what you make. It can be arty as hell, but as heck, but just make sure, you know, you definitely talk about Marxism, you know, in there somewhere. And then you've got like, you know, WR, History of the Organism, and Sweet Movie, and these really amazing movies like Daisies, and all of these really like avant-garde, surrealist, political performance art films that you're like, wait a minute, what? So it's like, that's exactly what we need now, is we need like an FDR public art program. You know, we do have a Great Depression. It's just underneath the surface.
Yeah.
If you look at the number of people unemployed and everything, I think it's going to be a really interesting depression, because, well, it is a depression. It's just everyone has a phone, you know, and so it's not like long lines of people who are homeless.
We do all our waiting at home.
All are homeless. They're out. They have phones, but they're sleeping in the streets. In the cities.
And we do all our waiting at home now. You know, it's like during this, you know, when COVID first hit and all the jobs shut down. You know, I remember calling the unemployment office 2,000 times a day for 2 weeks. You know, and And so that it wasn't seen, you know, and I know that I wasn't the only one. It's just not in the public eye anymore because I can do it from home.
And there's a great amount of artifice around the appearance of someone on social media, right? Which completely belies the actuality of their existence, of their reality, you know. And you know, the way that a depression would express itself now can be masked by the media easier, by you know, the government, and by people themselves in embarrassment.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, I oof. Yeah, I didn't want to be the kind of artist that was like, hey, look, I'm making all these fantastical environments, but I'm like losing my teeth. I didn't want to be that kind of artist, but that's the artist I am. And I do feel that, you know, I'm also the artist that's really played around with the avatars of the self. And so there's this like, what is really happening? Then what are you putting forth? And I didn't know that the tables would turn to where they are now, where I'd have to really go. Actually, I feel like the world really needs more vulnerability and intimacy and honesty, and needs to see, wow, that artists don't have dental care ever, and their teeth do fall out. They do. And so do we want to, we have to look at that. Like you're saying, it is the depression now, but we're going to have a filter on it so that people are going to be like, oh, it doesn't look so bad. Look at the rainbow filter there. As
Yeah.
people are still waiting to get the food. And at the same time, we probably have a lot more people coming to the creative practice somehow because they've lost their jobs, and so many people are like, I'm going to be an entrepreneur. I'm going to live out my truth. I'm going to do my dream, which is why I'm like, I'm going to have the brain bus. You know, this is the time to actually dream because things are closing down. This is the time that artists are needed the most because artists are adaptable.
Best part about the brain bus is that you'd have to get a yellow school bus too. So, you know.
Exactly. And, you know, I mean, if the yellow shtick works for people, that was the thing about, like, it's not my favorite color, but when I went and I took a flight and I'm wearing and I have the yellow suitcase and the yellow jumpsuit, I was probably wearing the same yellow jumpsuit. I had everything yellow, and the TSA agents smiled and they said, you just made my day. And I thought, well, then there you go. That's why you do it. That's why you dress up in all yellow. That's why you go in fully too. Like, that's where you paint everything yellow. That's where you, like, it's not your favorite color. It doesn't even matter. It's the fact that it cheers other people up and it starts a conversation. Well, yeah, obviously, sign me up. I'm that artist, you know. And I love that FDR said, let's get art into rural towns.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm feeling that. So it's Rock the Cradle is the film.
The Cradle Will Rock.
The Cradle Will Rock. Well,
And there's musical numbers. It's everything you could hope for in a movie. I can't remember who directed it, but they're lovely cast of characters. Bill Murray's in it.
oh,
I
Bill
remember.
Murray.
I remember the
Puppeteer.
Bill Murray. I mean, that's it. Puppets. Like, I'm my own Bill Murray, basically. Like, puppets. You know, I want to bring this world to the rural towns throughout America that, you know, don't get a chance to see, you know, it's not just like there's art that leaves you out of the conversation, and then there's art that really wants to inspire conversation, and art that will just talk to you. You know, there's like all of that. Now, I'm interested in bringing that art that communicates, and will bring a communication or bring that event to anywhere it goes. It's not that, wow, that piece is in the Met and it has this history and it's all about respect and reverence. And I'm more interested in what's alive in art. And if that means dressing up all yellow, if that means making the sculptural brain, if that means, bringing the puppets, if that means, putting on the vaudeville, the singing and the dancing, whatever that's needed to, to
Wow.
to bring the message, which isn't about, hey, here are my talents as an artist. It's more like, the brain is amazing. Look what the brain can do. The creative brain as a source,
Creative soul, they work in tandem.
Yeah.
But this has been amazing here. I think it's my bedtime.
I know it's my bedtime too.
Yeah.
But I just
lovely
want to thank you. This has been so awesome, and just, I mean, having seen so much of your artwork throughout the years, it's nice to actually sit down and have a conversation about it for once. So I really thank you for the opportunity.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure. Absolutely. I'm so grateful you could join in and have a conversation. It really, it's just like being in a room with people and talking. It's something I miss.
It's a nice change of pace for me. It's
Right?
absolutely wonderful not to be just like seeing someone talk at me from a YouTube video,
Oh my God. And I live alone, and and I'm careful with my immune system. I'm very careful. I never go out, basically. Here I am.
Right.
Why would you go out if you have that, right?
Yes.
Now I'm just really honoring that we can even do this,
Yeah.
It's been great. And I'm thanking you so much. Just so many conversations. It's gonna be really nice to process this all.
Well, let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And if you can, if you recorded this, please send the video.
I will. I'm sure there's some really good sound bites in here.
Yeah, I think there's something we
Golden nuggets.
Nuggets.
Yeah, we should talk about some of the TV stuff and interspersing it as well.
Yeah, totally. Let's set that up.
Okay.
All right. Blessed be to you both. It's been a pleasure.
It
So
has
good
been
seeing you here.
great seeing you.
Stress that.
Likewise. Thanks for joining in on this
And
round table. Making
someday
it.
soon I will hug you again.
Oh,
Yeah.
I know, right? This is the hug. We're like, wow, we're people in bodies.
Oh, right.
And this is the Great Depression, but I mean, great. This is great. This is great. Right. All right. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, Iga.
See you later, Misha.
Talk to you soon.